But the last time I saw him was in San Francisco, so it's like the old song, I Left My Heart in San Francisco by Tony Bennett.
At 75 years old, Linda Thompson sits in her living room, her hands trembling as she holds a photograph of herself and Elvis Presley from 1975. For nearly 5 decades, she's kept a secret that could shatter everything the world believes about the king of rock and roll. Today, that silence ends. "I've carried this burden for 47 years, Linda whispers, her voice breaking. "People think they know what happened to Elvis. They think they know why he died. But they don't know the whole truth. And I'm the only one left who does." The secret Linda's been hiding isn't just about Elvis's final days. It's about a phone call that happened 3 days before he died. A phone call where Elvis made a confession that would change everything we thought we knew about his death. A confession that has haunted Linda Thompson every single day since August 1977. You see, Linda wasn't just Elvis's girlfriend for 4.5 years. She was his lifeline. She was the woman who held him when he couldn't sleep, who talked him through his darkest moments, who literally kept him breathing on nights when his body was shutting down from the cocktail of prescription drugs coursing through his system. But here's what nobody knows. Linda had walked away from Elvis a full year before he died. She'd left Graceland, left Memphis, and tried to rebuild her life in Los Angeles. She thought she was done with Elvis Presley forever. She thought she'd finally escaped the golden prison that nearly destroyed her soul. She was wrong. 3 days before Elvis died, my phone rang at 2 in the morning, Linda reveals, tears streaming down her face. It was him, and what he told me, what he confessed to me, it's something I've never shared with another living soul. That phone call lasted 47 minutes. Elvis was calling from his bathroom at Graceland, the same bathroom where his body would be found just 72 hours later. His voice was different that night. Not the Elvis the world knew, not the confident, charismatic performer. This was a broken man, speaking in barely more than a whisper. "He told me he was sorry," Linda continues. "He said he was sorry for what he was about to do. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said, 'Linda, I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend anymore. You were right to leave me.'" But it wasn't just an apology call. Elvis made Linda promise something that night. Something that would explain why she stayed silent for decades, even when the media attacked her, even when fans blamed her for abandoning Elvis in his final year. "He made me swear that I would never tell anyone what really happened between us," Linda reveals. "He said his daughter Lisa Marie could never know the truth about what kind of man her father really was. He made me promise to protect his memory, no matter what it cost me." And it cost her everything. For 47 years, Linda Thompson has watched as biographers, documentarians, and so-called friends of Elvis have told their versions of his story. She's watched as they painted her as the heartless beauty queen who abandoned the king when he needed her most. She's endured decades of criticism from fans who blamed her for Elvis's death, who said if she'd stayed, he'd still be alive. All while knowing the truth. All while carrying the weight of Elvis's final confession. "I kept that promise for almost 50 years, Linda says, her voice gaining strength. "I protected his memory. I protected his daughter. I protected his legacy. But I'm 75 years old now, and I can't take this secret to my grave. Because what happened to Elvis? What he did? People need to know." The truth Linda's about to reveal isn't just about Elvis's death. It's about the man behind the legend. The man who was capable of love and cruelty in equal measure. The man who could make you feel like the most important person in the world one moment, and then destroy you with his words the next. But before we get to that final, heartbreaking phone call, you need to understand the twisted reality of what it was really like being Elvis Presley's woman. Because what Linda experienced behind Graceland's doors, it wasn't love, It was something much darker. When Linda Thompson first walked through the gates of Graceland in 1972, she thought she was entering a fairy tale. The mansion was beautiful, the lifestyle was glamorous, and Elvis Presley, the most famous man in the world, had chosen her. But fairy tales, Linda learned, can quickly become nightmares. Within 3 months of moving in, I realized I wasn't Elvis's girlfriend, Linda reveals, her voice heavy with pain. I was his possession, his beautiful, breathing doll that he could control, manipulate, and reshape however he wanted. The control started small. Elvis didn't like Linda's friends from Nashville, so he convinced her they were jealous of her new life. He didn't approve of her family visiting too often. They were disruptive to his schedule. Slowly, methodically, Elvis began cutting the threads that connected Linda to her old life, her old self. He had this way of making you feel like you were the problem, Linda explains. If I wanted to visit my sister, suddenly there was a crisis only I could handle. If I made plans with friends, Elvis would have a panic attack or a health scare right before I was supposed to leave. He never said, "You can't go." He just made it impossible for me to want to. The psychological manipulation was masterful. Elvis would shower Linda with gifts, attention, and affection when she complied with his unspoken rules. But the moment she showed any sign of independence, the punishment was swift and devastating. He would give me the silent treatment for days, Linda recalls, her hands clenching. In a house full of people, I would be completely invisible to him. His friends, his staff, they all took their cues from Elvis. If he wasn't speaking to me, nobody was speaking to me. I was utterly alone in a crowd. But it was the prescription drug nightmare that truly opened Linda's eyes to the prison she was living in. Elvis wasn't just taking pills to sleep or deal with pain. He was using them to escape reality. And Linda became his unwilling accomplice in that escape. I watched him take handfuls of pills every single night, Linda says, her voice breaking. Quaaludes, Demerol, Dilaudid, Percodan, names I'd never heard before, but learned to fear. And when I tried to help him, when I tried to hide the pills or talk to his doctor, Elvis turned vicious. The man who could charm millions with his smile became cruel and calculating when his drug supply was threatened. He accused Linda of trying to control him, of not understanding his pain, of being just like everyone else who wanted to use him. He would scream at me for hours, Linda remembers. He'd call me ungrateful, selfish, a gold digger who didn't really love him. Then the next morning, he'd act like nothing happened. He'd bring me flowers and apologize. But the pills never stopped. Linda tried everything. She begged Elvis's doctor to stop prescribing. She threw pills away. She even tried to get Elvis's father Vernon to intervene. But Elvis had surrounded himself with people who depended on him financially, and nobody was willing to risk their livelihood by challenging the king. I realized I was completely alone in trying to save him, Linda says, and he resented me for it. The more I tried to help, the more he punished me. I was living in this beautiful mansion, but I felt like I was suffocating. The breaking point came during a tour in 1975. Elvis had collapsed backstage after taking his usual pre-show cocktail of stimulants and painkillers. Linda had spent the night in a hospital waiting room, praying he wouldn't die, only to have Elvis blame her the next day for overreacting and embarrassing him in front of his band. That's when I realized the truth, Linda says, tears flowing freely now. I wasn't his partner. I wasn't even his friend. I was his enabler. My presence in his life was making it easier for him to destroy himself, because he knew I'd always be there to pick up the pieces. But leaving wasn't simple. Elvis had isolated Linda so completely that she had nowhere to go, no support system outside of Graceland. Her career had been put on hold, her friendships had withered, and her sense of self had been systematically dismantled. My freedom at night. The nights were the worst. Elvis would take his pills and drift into a drug-induced haze, and Linda would lie awake beside him, listening to his breathing, terrified that each breath might be his last. I spent 4.5 years being his unofficial nurse, his emotional crutch, his whipping post, Linda says. And the whole time Elvis's inner circle was telling him that I was the problem, that I was trying to change him, control him, take away his freedom. The irony was devastating. Linda was fighting for Elvis's life while being painted as the villain in his story. And then came the betrayal that changed everything. The moment Linda discovered Elvis's secret that made her question everything she thought she knew about the man she loved. It was October 1975 when Linda Thompson's world came crashing down. She'd been living at Graceland for over 3 years, sacrificing everything for Elvis, believing she was the center of his universe. That belief was about to be shattered in the most devastating way possible. I found the letters by accident, Linda says, her voice barely above a whisper. I was looking for Elvis's prescription bottles. He'd hidden them again, and I was trying to keep track of how many pills he was taking. I opened his bedside drawer, and there they were. Love letters, dozens of them. But these weren't fan letters. These were intimate, passionate exchanges between Elvis and multiple women he was seeing while Linda was living in his house, caring for him, loving him unconditionally. The first letter I read was from a woman named Sheila Ryan, Linda recalls, her hands shaking. She was thanking Elvis for the beautiful night they'd shared in Las Vegas, describing things they'd done together, using pet names that I thought were only mine. Linda's heart was pounding as she discovered letter after letter, phone numbers scrawled on hotel stationery, Polaroid photographs that made her stomach turn. But it was the letter from Ginger Alden that destroyed her completely. Ginger was writing about their future together, Linda says, tears streaming down her face. She was talking about marriage, about having children with Elvis. She was calling herself his real woman and saying she couldn't wait until he got rid of the current situation. The current situation. That's what Linda had been reduced to. A problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. I sat on that bathroom floor for 2 hours reading every single letter, Linda remembers, learning that the man I'd given up everything for was living a completely different life the moment I wasn't around. While I was home at Graceland, worried sick about his health, he was promising other women the same future he'd promised me. When Elvis returned from his Vegas engagement that night, Linda was waiting for him with the letters spread across their bed. She expected him to be ashamed, to apologize, to at least acknowledge what he'd done. Instead, Elvis did something that would haunt Linda for the rest of her life. He laughed. He actually laughed, Linda says, her voice filled with disbelief even now. He looked at me standing there with tears streaming down my face, holding evidence of his betrayal, and he laughed. Then he said, "Baby, you're being dramatic. Those girls mean nothing to me." But Linda had read the letters. She knew they meant something. She knew Elvis was making promises to these women, spending money on them, telling them he loved them. The same words, the same promises he'd made to her. That's when Elvis started gaslighting me, Linda explains. He told me I was imagining things, reading too much into innocent friendships. He said my jealousy was ugly and unbecoming. He made me feel like I was crazy for being hurt by what I'd discovered. Elvis's manipulation tactics went into overdrive. He alternated between rage and charm, between accusations and apologies. He told Linda she was the only woman he truly loved, while simultaneously making her feel guilty for questioning his loyalty. He would say things like, "Linda, you know I need my space. You know I can't be tied down like other men," Linda recalls. He made it sound like I was being unreasonable for expecting fidelity, like I was trying to cage a wild animal. The gaslighting was so effective that Linda began to doubt her own sanity. Maybe she was being too possessive. Maybe this was just how relationships worked when you were dating Elvis Presley. Maybe she should be grateful for the time she had with him and stop asking for more. I actually started apologizing to him, Linda says, shaking her head in disbelief. I apologized for snooping, for being jealous, for making him feel bad about his friendships. I let him convince me that I was the problem. But the damage was done. Linda couldn't unsee those letters, couldn't unhear the promises Elvis had made to other women. Every time he left for a tour, every time he took a mysterious phone call, every time he was distant or distracted, Linda wondered who else was in his life. The trust was gone, Linda admits. And without trust, love becomes torture. I was living in constant fear, fear of being replaced, fear of being lied to, fear of discovering more betrayals. The final straw came 6 months later when Linda found out Elvis had been telling people that she was just a phase and that he was looking for someone more mature and understanding, code words for someone who wouldn't question his behavior. I realized I had two choices, Linda says, her voice growing stronger. I could stay and continue to lose pieces of myself every day, or I could leave and try to remember who I used to be. The decision to leave wasn't just about the other women. It was about Linda's survival as a human being. She was disappearing, becoming a shadow of herself, living in constant anxiety and self-doubt. I chose me, Linda says firmly. For the first time in 4.5 years, I chose myself over Elvis Presley. But leaving Elvis wasn't the end of Linda's nightmare. Because what happened next, those final phone calls, that last desperate plea, that's what's been eating her alive for 47 years. 3 days before Elvis Presley died, Linda Thompson received the phone call that would torment her for the rest of her life. It was 2 a.m. on August 13, 1977, and Elvis's voice on the other end was unlike anything she'd ever heard before. "He was crying," Linda whispers, her own tears falling freely. Not the angry, frustrated crying I'd seen during our fights. This was different. This was the sound of a man who had given up. Elvis told Linda something that night that she's never shared with another soul. He confessed that he'd been planning his own death for months. The prescription drugs weren't just an addiction anymore, they were his exit strategy. He said, "Linda, I can't live like this anymore. I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. You were the only real thing in my life, and I destroyed that too," Linda reveals, her voice breaking completely. Elvis begged Linda to forgive him, not just for the affairs, not just for the manipulation, but for what he was about to do. He told her he'd already written letters to Lisa Marie and his father Vernon. He'd made his peace with God. He was ready to go. "I begged him to let me come to Memphis," Linda cries. "I told him we could work through anything, that his life was worth fighting for. But he said it was too late. He said he'd poisoned everything good in his life, and he couldn't live with that anymore." The call lasted 47 minutes. Elvis told Linda he loved her, that she'd been the best thing that ever happened to him, and that she needed to live her life without guilt or regret. Then he hung up. "I called Graceland immediately," Linda says. "I spoke to Charlie Hodge, begged him to check on Elvis, to get him help. Charlie promised me he would, but I don't think he understood how serious it was." 3 days later, Elvis was dead. "For 47 years, I've carried the guilt of that phone call," Linda admits. "I've wondered if I could have saved him, if I should have called the police, if I should have broken my promise and told someone what he'd confessed to me." But Linda understands now that Elvis's death wasn't her fault. It wasn't anyone's fault except the disease of addiction and the prison of fame that consumed him. "I'm sharing this now because I want people to understand that Elvis didn't accidentally overdose," Linda says firmly. "He was a man in so much emotional pain that death felt like his only escape. And maybe if we'd talked about mental health back then the way we do now, maybe he'd still be alive." Linda Thompson's courage to finally speak her truth reminds us that behind every legend is a human story filled with pain, love, and tragedy. If this moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe because there are more untold stories that need to be revealed. Linda Thompson's courage to finally speak her truth reminds us that behind every legend is a human story. If this moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe because there are more untold stories that need to be revealed.